Hello, I'm Barbara Guazzelli, and I'm PhD candidate at the University of São Paulo under the guidance of Professor Manuel Rodrigues Alves, and at the University of Sevilla under the guidance of Professor Carlos Tapia. Today I will present part of our reflections entitled Material versus Immaterial Dichotomy, the Territorialization of Intangible Heritage as Urban Entrepreneurialism. Our hypothesis seeks to understand manifestations of the tangible and its links with historical territories, using as object of study resonance of flamenco in the neighborhood of Triana in Sevilla, southern Spain, considering that the material versus immaterial dichotomy reaches high complexity and goes beyond traditional layers of information. I will start by characterizing part of the case study of this investigation, Andalusian flamenco. Flamenco is an Andalusian art that includes the baile, the sing, and the guitar music. Known for its great emotional intensity, flamenco is distinguished by its great graceful movements of arms, sapateos feroces, deep lamentations, and guitarras gales. In flamenco, the dance, the singing, and the guitar merge into a single artistic expression. When the three elements are present, the dance is what unites all the elements. La bailaora ou bailaor interprets the feelings that express el cantaor ou cantaora en el cante. To create your dance, use the language of the flamenco dance. Movements of arms and arms, contours, giros, sapateos, rhythms and contratempos. The bailaor or bailaora becomes a musician too. The guitar and the percussion that plays on the zapateo combine in a complete musical piece. Flamenco was born in the middle of the century 18 in Andalusia. But this art has dance and musical elements that existed in the different cultures that contributed to its birth. They also incorporated African influence that were recognizable from Africans who passed through Andalusia and from the Caribbeans who arrived in Spain. Flamenco is the result of a cultural mix Gypsy, Arab, Christian, and Jewish. The multicultural roots of flamenco are reflected in all its aspects dance, sing, and guitar music. In the song and the music, for example, there are influences from the chants of the synagogue, Gregorian chants, Andalusian folk songs, traditional Andalusian music, Arab sounds, and African rhythms. Flamenco is the badge of identity of numerous communities and groups, in particular the Gitano ethnic community, which has played an essential role in its development. In flamenco, as in other areas, there are many expressions that are characteristic of this art. One of them is duende flamenco, an expression that is difficult to perceive, since duende is something to be felt, which touches the emotional. Poet Federico Garcia Lorca states that duende is a power and not an action. It is a struggle and not a thought. It is not a matter of faculty, but of a true style of life, that is of blood, that is of very ancient culture, of creation in action. Furthermore, flamenco is a music genre included in the UNESCO representative list of the Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity since 2010, where it says flamenco is performed during religious festivals, rituals, church ceremonies, and at private celebrations. Transmission occurs through dynasties, families, social groups, and flamenco clubs, all of which play a key role in its preservation and dissemination. This is a photo of common scene quite representative of a flamenco show in a concert hall as a tourist activity. About intangible cultural heritage, it is important to understand the dimensions that are considered for it to be a recognized heritage, and thus understand what are the criteria used in the patrimonialization process of an intangible heritage. One of them is the collective aspect, which means there is no safeguard action aimed only at individuals. Another one is the narration and transmission, which relates to process of transmission of knowledge, techniques, meanings, memories, and values associated with the cultural asset, from the oldest to the youngest. And finally, dynamic conception of these cultural assets, which means incorporating into the traditional field of heritage the dimension of the present, of living cultural practices, of everyday life, of synchrony. There are attempts related to the preservation and dissemination of flamenco concerning the dimensions mentioned, but its connection with tourist activities leads to a specific situation. In the images, we see the sale of products such as dresses and scarves with prints that refer to flamenco, as well as street arts performing flamenco. We also see the possibility of a portrait dressed as a flamenco artist. All these photos were taken at tourist spots in the city of Sevilla, Andalusia, southern Spain. What is taking place here is the subtraction of singularities from processes and subalternized groups located in Andalusia, which is today related to the mercantilization of ethnic manifestations transformed into products for the cultural industry. The Andalusian cultural policies of patrimonialization and flamenco, as well as its inclusion in the UNESCO representative list of intangible cultural heritage, are reconfiguring both the expressive forms of sociability, learning, and autochthonous transmission, as well as their promotion, diffusion, and circulation outside of their contexts, dynamics, and vernacular meanings. This is a photograph of a group of flamenco artists performing at the Plaza de España in Sevilla, and the question I would like to ask is if the duende lives here. In view of what has already been stated here regarding intangible heritage, its patrimonialization process, and attempts at preservation, I'd like to point out some questions about the material versus immaterial dichotomy from the essay Form and Material of the book by Willem Flusser, whose fully translated title is The Encoded World. In this essay, Flusser points out that he feels the need to discuss the distorted concept of immateriality. The material world is that which feels forms. It is the feeling of forms. With the development of the sciences, the theoretical perspective entered into a dialectical relationship with the sensory perspective, observation, theory, experiment, which led to a materialism for which matter is reality. Flusser puts here the original opposition between matter and form, where, for example, what I see is wood in the form of a table. It is true that this wood is hard, I can trip over it, but the shape of the table is eternal. So the shape of the table is real, and the table content is only apparent. If form is understood as the opposite of matter, then one cannot speak of material design. If form is the how of matter and matter is the what of form, the design is one of the methods of shaping matter and making it appear as it appears and not otherwise. Design, like all cultural expressions, shows that matter does not appear unless it is unformed, and thus, once informed, it begins to manifest itself as a phenomenon. Therefore, if we pursue the material versus immaterial dichotomy, in what concerns flamenco as an intangible heritage, what would its form be like? We believe there is an ongoing process that builds a materialized version of this intangible heritage. One can think of the duende as the intangibility of this heritage, as well as its manifestations as music and dance, the way in which its materiality is presented, where you can check the culture as a commodity. Flamenco fashion market moves millions of euros annually, and most of these companies are located in Sevilla. In light of the pandemic situation, efforts have been made to sell these products internationally, and the Andalusian fashion sector expects rapid growth in Asia in the coming years. Asia has become the second continental destination for the Andalusian fashion sector after Europe. This concerns the already much discussed culture as a commodity, where there is a widespread belief that there is something so special about cultural products and events existing on some higher plane of human creativity and meaning than that located in the factories of mass production and consumption. If you think of other ways to capitalize on culture, what we believe is that in the case of flamenco in Sevilla, this heritage is being territorialized in the neighborhood of Triana. Today, the Islamic origin to the Triana suburb is considered to be true, based on the results of archaeological and geographical studies carried out there. The first signs of occupation date back to the 12th century. The image on this slide shows an overview of Seville from 1585, which foregrounds Triana and the important presence of gardens through its interior extension, what concerns its peasant origin. Triana was once a village separate from the city center, which grew thanks to its strategic position along the river Guadalquivir, gaining life when the first bridge was built. On this map of 1884, we can clearly see the city of Seville, whose limits were established by the wall, and the neighborhood of Triana to the west, on the other side of the Guadalquivir River. This is a painting from 1890 in which the Triana Bridge stands out in the background, the ruins of the Castle of São Jorge, and in the foreground the popular houses and their respective docks. This riverbank is in a state of disrepair due to instabilities caused by the frequent floods and this neighborhood faced. This is the current view of Triana from Sevilla. It is important to emphasize the historical layers that this territory accumulates, as this helps to configure this landscape as an urban cultural landscape that expresses traditions and values and forms a record of ongoing interactions between people and place. These interactions and the values they embody wield both tangible and intangible heritage. This is the current view from above the Isabel II Bridge to São Jorge Castle. This is one of the bridges that lead from Seville to Triana, being the oldest. Normally, the bridge is crossed not only by residents of Triana but also by tourists who, upon reaching the other side, and find Triana Market. In the lower part of the market are the remains of the Castle of São Jorge, the seat of the Inquisitional Court. In 2001, the new Triana Market was inaugurated in its traditional location, which emphasizes the tourist appeal that has been given to the neighborhood. Immediately across the street is a monument dedicated to Triana flamenco art. It is about a woman with a guitar and refers to the flamenco tradition of Triana. It is important to note that in addition to being remembered for being the home of sailors and artisans, besides refuge for gypsies, Triana is considered the birthplace of flamenco. As stated at the beginning of this presentation, flamenco in Seville is mainly gypsy in origin, and Triana is where artists lived for a long time, until they were expelled. They had been living there for perhaps 4 centuries in example of coexistence and integration, but at the end of the 50s of the last century, their expulsion was decreed. Today, Triana is placed by tourist discourse as the birthplace of flamenco, but little is said about the processes of speculation that it faces, especially with regard to the use of flamenco, in particular an intangible heritage, as its impetus. Triana is sold as an original flamenco territory in the context of tourism in Andalusia and participates in a process of urban entrepreneurialism with regard to the thematization of the landscape. There are many examples of the landscape thematization linked to touristification process, but what is being highlighted here is the intangible heritage as the main inducer of this process. One of the aspects of this commodification concerns urban entrepreneurialism. Sevilla, elected Creative Music by UNESCO, has flamenco as one of its main tourist attractions, and in Triana, consequently, one of the supposed most of its authentic destinations, thus being placed as a global commodity. In our assumptions, this neighborhood is a place for the sale of pure flamenco, shows improvised spaces that use a distant echo of what this heritage literally means. However, the duende is missing there, and this void is also visible in the thematization of this space, which makes this kind of tourism an estrangement for the locals in their own city. Finally, if we get Flusser's original position between matter and form, what we can think of flamenco as matter and the city represented here by Triana as its form. As this is a tourist city that offers unique intangible values, as well as historical sites in constant preservation, the question that arises is, Is it really possible to separate the material and the intangible? Looks like urban entrepreneurialism already found the answer. Thank you.